On Mother's Day morning, my daughter didn't open the door fully. She stepped out instead, closed it gently behind her, and said, "You're just a burden now." I'm 74. I baked her favorite banana bread at 5 a.m. this morning. Even wore the blue cardigan she gave me 3 years ago. But I wasn't welcome. Not anymore. Before I tell you how I rewrote my legacy that same week, tell me where you're listening from, and subscribe if you believe no one should be discarded after a lifetime of giving. There wasn't yelling, no drama. Just that soft, private cruelty. The kind you carry in your chest like a cold stone. She didn't meet my eyes. Just held the loaf like it was some awkward gift from a stranger. Then turned back toward her house. Inside, I heard voices. Laughter. The clink of silverware. Her in-laws were already at the table. I waited. I don't know why. Maybe part of me thought she'd change her mind. Call me, Mom, again. Ask me in. But the door stayed closed, and the banana bread started to cool in my hands. So I turned, stepped off the porch, and walked back to my car with a quiet that didn't feel like peace. The street smelled like fresh, cut grass and charcoal smoke. Everyone else was celebrating something. I sat behind the wheel, hands in my lap. The cardigan felt tighter than it used to. Maybe it was just the ache in my chest. This wasn't the first time she'd made me feel small, but today, it felt final. You give up decades. You skip vacations. You say no to promotions. You raise them right. And they still choose people who've known them 10 minutes over the person who gave them life. She used to cry when I left her at daycare. Now she closes the door without hesitation. Maybe the hardest part isn't the rejection itself. It's realizing how practiced they've become at it. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I drove straight to the church basement, banana bread in tow. It found a better table than I ever could. If your daughter closed the door on Mother's Day, would you forgive or write a new will? After Tom died, I stopped drinking hot coffee. Not because I didn't like it, but because the sound of the drip machine at 5 a.m. made the house feel too empty, too wide. We lived in a small blue clapboard house on Parkview Street. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and the quietest kitchen in all of Iowa after the funeral. Julie was only 7. I remember her little legs swinging from the breakfast chair, feet not touching the floor. She'd ask every morning, "Is Daddy still up in the clouds?" And I'd nod, then tie her shoelaces, double loop, and send her off to school with a Bologna sandwich and a juice box I could barely afford. Back then, everything was about surviving the day, holding it together until 8 p.m., when she'd fall asleep beside me on the couch, her hair smelling like the Johnson's lavender shampoo I bought on sale. Some nights, I'd sit on the porch and listen to the crickets, hands in my lap, no music playing, just stillness. Grief doesn't shout. It hums in quiet corners. In the rustle of grocery bags you carry in alone, in the sound of only one toothbrush in the holder. Julie was my reason to breathe. I stitched buttons back on her winter coats, read every single school flyer, and said yes to every bake sale, even when I had nothing left to bake. We built a little world. Just her and me. Lunches on the courthouse lawn. Movies from the discount bin, dancing barefoot in the living room on rainy Friday nights. She'd whisper, "Don't leave me, Mom." And I'd promise, "Never. Not until you don't need me anymore." And funny how kids grow up and take those words literally. But I meant them. Every one of them. When Julie turned 13, she stopped holding my hand in public. It wasn't a fight. It was just subtle. A step ahead of me on the sidewalk. A sigh when I asked how school was. A new silence that filled up car rides. Her bedroom door, once always open, stayed shut more often. Music drifted through the cracks. Not the silly Disney songs she used to dance to, but brooding lyrics I didn't recognize. I knocked before entering. I respected her space. But it hurt, dear God, it hurt. Still, I packed her lunches. Still, I checked her homework. Still, I showed up for every choir recital, even when she didn't look for me in the crowd. There was a job offer that year. Assistant curriculum director at a district 40 miles away. Better pay. Benefits. It would have meant moving. New start, fresh air. But she was in her first year of high school. All her friends were here, so I said no. Didn't even tell her. She needed stability, and I needed her to feel safe. So I stayed. I cleaned houses part-time in the summer, tutored reading after school, skipped new shoes to pay for her clarinet rental. There was this one Friday night. She had a sleepover, and I got off work late. I picked up her favorite ice cream, cookies and cream. But when I got home, the kitchen was dark. A note on the fridge, gone to Sarah's. Don't wait up. The ice cream melted on the counter. That was the first time I felt left behind. Not rejected. Just forgotten. She came home the next morning with glitter on her sleeves and laughter in her throat. I made pancakes like nothing happened. Because that's what mothers do. We forgive without asking. We keep the fridge full, even when the kitchen grows too quiet. I used to believe distance was a phase. That love always loops back around. But sometimes, dear, sometimes it loops in the opposite direction. The day I dropped Julie off at college, the sun was unforgiving. We parked in front of her dorm. Brick walls, ivy creeping up like ambition. She was all nerves and lip gloss. Kept checking her phone. Her suitcase handle wouldn't retract, and she laughed like it didn't matter. But I saw it. The slight wince when I touched her arm too long. The glance toward her new roommate when I offered to unpack. I didn't. I just helped her carry the boxes up. Left them by her bed, watched as she laid out her new life like folded laundry. I'll call you later tonight, she said, hugging me quick, like a favor. I love you, Mom. I smiled, then drove 4 hours back to Des Moines with the radio off. Didn't cry. Just watched the highway pass like years I couldn't rewind. Back home, the house felt stale. No music, no slammed doors, no glitter in the carpet. Just dust and my own heartbeat echoing through quiet walls. I made tea, opened the mail, fed the cat, and when the phone didn't ring by 9, I told myself she was busy. Excited. Happy. She did call. 2 days later. Told me about a lecture she loved. A boy she'd met in biolab. She sounded older. The calls grew shorter. Emails turned into texts. Texts turned into silence. By Thanksgiving, she'd learned to talk about investments and branding. She corrected how I pronounced plo. Laughed when I called her clarinet or old friend. The cardigan I sent her that Christmas came back in a donation box by mistake. At least, that's what she said. I didn't press. Didn't guilt her. Didn't ask why photos on her social media had everyone but me. Love isn't owed, not even from the ones you raise. Still, when people at church asked how she was doing, I'd say, "Oh, Julie. She's thriving. My smart girl." Because it was true, just not the whole truth. She grew into someone impressive, someone sharp, someone with no use for small town sentiment. And I stayed the same. Maybe that was my mistake, assuming motherhood was a permanent title. Turns out, it comes with an expiration date. It didn't start on Mother's Day. The signs had been there. Soft, almost polite, but unmistakable. Like the time Julie took me to brunch with her work friends. They wore sleek black coats and talked fast, too fast. When I asked what seed round meant, she laughed. Not cruel, just embarrassed. "Don't worry about it, Mom," she said. "This stuff's complicated." So I smiled, sipped my coffee, and stopped asking questions. At the table, someone mentioned retirement homes. I said, "I'm still mowing my lawn at 74. Julie chimed in, "Only because you won't let go of control." It was a joke. Everyone laughed, even me, but the words stuck like wet fabric. Hard to shake. That night, as we walked to the car, I offered her leftovers. The waitress had boxed up half my sandwich. Julie hesitated, then said, "You don't have to keep everything, Mom. It's not the depression." I didn't say a word. Just tucked the box under my arm and let it sit there. Heavy. At Christmas, she gave me an air fryer. I told her I preferred my oven. She rolled her eyes. "See, you never adapt." That's the problem. I stared at the ribbon she hadn't bothered to curl. Said thank you. She offered to show me how to use it, but her tone made it sound like a lesson. Not a gift. We never used to talk like that. She once called me a warrior, back when I worked 2 jobs and still made it to every parent-teacher night. Now I was just inconvenient, old-fashioned, slow to learn. The last time she visited, I offered to lend her some money. Her business had hit a rough patch. Julie smiled, tight-lipped. Thanks. But I don't believe in mixing pity with capital. I didn't know what that meant. But it didn't sound like love. 3 weeks before Mother's Day, we planned to meet for coffee. Julie picked the place, some trendy cafe with oat milk everything. I arrived 10 minutes early. Found a small table near the window. Outside, the sky was low and gray. One of those Iowa mornings that smelled like wet concrete and leftover winter. I ordered 2 lattes. Hers with cinnamon, like she always liked it. Mine plain. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The foam on her drink started to collapse. At 9:42, my phone lit up. A text: "So sorry, investor call. Can't make it. Son, no. Love you." A no, next time. I watched the message fade into my lock screen. My background photo still her college graduation. I stayed another 10 minutes. Then got up. Dropped her lat in the trash. It sloshed on my shoes. That night, she didn't call. I didn't either. Another time. I asked if she wanted to come with me to the farmer's market. She used to love the kettle corn, the flowers, she said. That's kind of your thing now, isn't it? I told myself she was busy, tired, overwhelmed. But the truth sat heavier than that. She wasn't tired. She was distant, disinterested. Once, I offered her a box of her old journals I'd saved. The ones with glittery covers and bubble letter hearts. She blinked. Then said, "Why would I want that?" No smile. No thank you. Just indifference. I took them home. Put them back in the closet. Some nights, I'd reread a page or 2. Try to remember the girl who once wrote, "My mom is my safe place." Now she barely asked how I was feeling, if I had groceries, if the arthritis in my knees had flared again. Her voice on the phone had become sharp, efficient. Meetings, flights, deadlines. Once I coughed during a call. She said, "Could you mute, please?" That silence afterward, that's when it really landed. I wasn't part of her world anymore. I was noise. I folded laundry after that call with hands that felt too still, too forgotten. Maybe I raised her too well. Maybe I taught her strength so hard. She forgot softness. It started with the light bill. 1 month, I forgot to pay it. Just slipped my mind. The envelope sat unopened under the phone book. Julie found it during a visit. Held it up like a warning flag. "Mom," she said, voice low. "You can't let this happen again." I apologized. Told her it was a one-time thing. She sighed. Rubbed her temples like I was a stubborn child. "That's it?" she said. "I'm taking over your accounts." I laughed. But she wasn't joking. "We'll put everything on autopay. I'll monitor things. You'll never have to worry." It sounded kind. Smart even. So I said yes. That weekend, she brought over her laptop. Made a spreadsheet. Labeled tabs with my bank name. Mortgage balance, monthly essentials. She made it sound like help. Like love. I gave her my passwords. Signed a few papers she printed from her car. "You don't need to read it all," she said. "It's just so I can call them if there's an issue." I trusted her. She was my daughter. And honestly, and after years of juggling bills, it felt nice to let someone else steer. The first real shift happened in the bank lobby. We were updating some details. The teller smiled at me, then turned to Julie. "Will she be the co-owner or just power of attorney?" Julie answered without hesitation. "So, owner." I blinked. The words tasted strange in my mouth. "Julie, why does it have to be both our names?" She gave me that smile again. The one that said, "You wouldn't understand. Trust me, Mom, it's just simpler. Smoother if anything happens." I nodded. The teller clicked her keyboard. The printer hissed. Something inside me shifted. I looked around the branch. The floors were too clean. The air smelled like recycled paper and plastic pens. I remembered coming here with Tom. His calloused hand over mine when we signed the loan for the house. Now my name was being shortened, shared. When we walked out, the sunlight hit my eyes hard. Julie was already answering a call. Already halfway down the steps. I stood there a moment. The paper in my purse felt heavier than it should have. Later that night, I opened my checkbook. It still said, Lorraine Walker, at the top. But somehow, I felt less like myself. 3 months after the bank visit, I stopped getting mail from the mortgage company. At first, I didn't notice. The bills were still being paid, on time, as promised. But the envelopes changed. They no longer said, Lorraine Walker. They said, Julie Kim, account holder. I asked her about it one Sunday afternoon. We were sitting in my kitchen. Sunlight hit the window just right, making her look younger than she felt to me. I said, why are the house papers coming to you now? She didn't look up from her phone. It's just easier. You hate paperwork, remember? I did. But I never asked her to erase me. A week later, I got a notice about my home insurance. Coverage adjusted, premiums reduced. Julie had switched providers. She hadn't mentioned it. I called her. Oh, it's fine, Mom. I shopped around. Got a better deal. No discussion. No signature needed. Because apparently, my name wasn't enough anymore. Then came the email. I was reading the news on my laptop, a cup of Earl Grey steaming beside me, when the alert popped up. Subjective. Deed confirmation, primary ownership adjustment complete. I stared at it. The sender wasn't familiar, but the message was clear. The greeting read, Dear Ms. Julie Kim. Plea in the first line made my stomach tighten. We confirm the successful transfer of primary deed status for the residence at my address. My house. I clicked it again and again. As if the words might change, I picked up the phone. Dialed Julie. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom. Everything okay? My voice shook. What did you do with the house papers? Silence. Then. Oh, it's nothing major. Just a name adjustment for liability reasons. Julie, am I still on the deed? Another pause. You're still on it, just not primary. It's safer this way. For both of us. I didn't respond. I couldn't. She filled the space. Mom, you know I'd never do anything to hurt you. I wanted to believe her. So badly. But my name, the one I signed on the loan with your father, was now second, in my own home. That night, I opened the file cabinet in the hallway. The one with my wedding photos, old tax returns, Julie's baby bracelet tucked in a manila envelope. I searched for the original deed. Found only a photocopy, edges worn. My name faded. I held it in both hands. The paper crinkled. Something inside me did too. The first time I realized I wasn't needed anymore was when no one told me about Lily's graduation. She was turning 5. Preschool milestone. They had a little cap and gown ceremony at Julie's community center. I found out through Facebook. A photo, Lily beaming, tassel crooked, holding a popsicle stick diploma. Everyone was tagged, except me. No invite, no mention. I stared at that photo for a long time, zoomed in until the pixels blurred. There, on the edge, was the banana dress I'd bought for her last spring. Still fit, but I wasn't there to see it swish. That week, Julie didn't return my calls. Just one text, phrasey week. All good here. I didn't push. I just sat in my backyard. The grass was patchy from too much shade. The bird feeder hung crooked. I watched the breeze move through the maple leaves like a ghost. A few days later, I went to the mailbox. A small envelope sat inside. Handwritten. No return address. I opened it at the kitchen counter. Inside, a recipe clipped from a magazine. Banana bread with honey and cardamom. A note in soft cursive. I thought of you. Try this version. M. Margaret. She lived 2 houses down. Wore floral muumuus and always waved from her porch. Her brother Henry had been bedridden since his stroke. She pushed him around the block on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Rain or shine. That Friday, I made the bread. Took a loaf to her door. We talked for 20 minutes, mostly about the squirrels stealing her tomatoes. It felt easy. The next week, she brought over some jam. Then I gave her leftover lasagna. She sent me home with soup. Little trades, little kindnesses. One morning, I caught her raking her yard with one arm. I grabbed my gloves. We finished it together in silence. She looked at me and said, "Don't let that smile go too long, Lorraine. You earned it." And I realized, this woman saw me. Not as a relic, not as a burden. Just me. That night, I slept without the TV on. First time in months, I didn't need noise to feel less alone. I just needed one person who remembered I was still here. Mornings became quieter, but not lonelier. I started waking up before the sun, boiled water for tea, stepped outside to check the garden beds. The mint had come back strong. The tomatoes were stubborn. Just like me. Margaret called most evenings. Sometimes I'd go over with a casserole. Sometimes we'd just sit and listen to the radio. Henry was getting better with his words. One night, he looked at me and said, "Peach pie. You made it?" I smiled. "Years ago," I said. "You remember that?" He nodded slow. "Still smell it." I didn't cry, but something in me softened. Life was small, predictable, but gently so. Still, some days hurt more than others. On Lily's birthday, I mailed a card, a soft pink one with glitter balloons. Inside, I tucked a pressed pansy from my garden. Julie never replied. No photo. No thank you. Margaret saw me watering the pansies that evening. She didn't ask. Just handed me a lemon bar and said, "Let's sit." So we did. On the porch, the dusk curling around our ankles. I told myself I was okay. Better, even. And I almost believed it. Until that Thursday night. Julie had stopped by earlier that day. She said it was to drop off my prescription. Didn't stay long. Didn't sit down. Just hovered near the door. Talked about work. Mentioned something about Lily switching schools. Said, she needs less noise in her life right now. I didn't ask what that meant. After she left, I made tea. Put on the kettle, lit the lamp. Then I glanced at the fridge. The magnet was there. The one from Lily's trip to the zoo. But the photo beneath it was gone. It used to be her first day of preschool. That tiny blue backpack. That crooked smile. Now, just the magnet. I opened the drawer, sifted through the coupons and grocery lists. Nothing. I checked the trash. Empty bag. I stood there a long time. The kitchen light humming softly above me. Steam curling from the forgotten tea. She took it. No note, no explanation. Just gone. Like I never stood behind that camera. Never kissed Lily's hair before school. I leaned on the counter. Let the silence settle around me. And for the first time since Julie was born, I wondered, what's left when your daughter no longer wants your face in her house? Julie called on a Monday. Dinner this Friday. Just a few friends. I want you there. Her voice was lighter than usual. Hopeful even. I paused. It's not just family. She laughed. Oh, come on, Mom. You need to meet my world. Her world. I chose a navy blouse, pressed it twice, put on the silver earrings Tom gave me in 1983. Margaret offered to drive me. I said no. Some part of me wanted to arrive alone, like a grown woman, not someone needing an escort. Julie's house was all glass and stone. Big windows, no curtains. Lights so bright I saw my wrinkles reflected in every pane. She opened the door wearing cream silk. Kissed my cheek without touching it. Inside, the room buzzed. Wine glasses clinked, laughter bounced off marble floors. No one looked like me. She waved toward a group near the kitchen island. Everyone, this is my mother. Lorraine Walker. They turned, smiled politely. She's traditional, still pays bills by check. Lauder. I forced a smile. Julie poured wine into my glass. Ignore me, I tease. But she's from a different era. My name hadn't been on her lips in weeks. Now it was a prop. I stood beside a man discussing exit strategies and Q2 projections. He asked if I used Twitter. I said no. He nodded like I'd confessed a crime. Dinner was served. Long table. Mismatched conversations. I sat at the far end. Julie was 2 chairs down. She didn't look my way. Someone asked what I used to do before retirement. I taught high school English. He raised a brow. Oh wow, that's noble. Noble. Like raising pigeons. Julie chimed in. She made me memorize poetry. Still quotes Frost. Everyone laughed again. I tasted metal in my mouth. The salmon was cold. Later, someone spilled wine. A man in a blazer apologized to Julie, but hey, at least it didn't hit the antique. He gestured toward me. Julie didn't correct him. She smiled. And I understood. I was the antique. There for show. To prove a point. To soften her edges in front of sharper people. Not a guest. Not a mother. A curated story. The candlelight flickered against the silverware. My reflection in the spoon looked tired. Maybe this wasn't a dinner. Maybe it was a performance. And I was the closing act. If your child used your love as decoration, would you stay quiet or take the stage back? Julie offered to drive me home. I'll get your coat, she said, already halfway to the closet. I waited by the door, arms folded, the sounds of silverware and chatter still ringing in my ears. In the car, she kept the music low, something jazzy, forgettable. She glanced over. They loved you, you know. I didn't answer. She tried again. You were charming. A real hit. I looked out the window. The streetlights blurred in the glass. My reflection stared back, flat, unsmiling. I'm glad you came, she added, as awkward as it was. There it was. Truth in the crack. I said nothing. When we pulled into my driveway, she reached for the gear shift and sighed. Next time, just relax a little more. You don't have to try so hard. She smiled. I didn't. I opened the door. The night air was sharp against my skin. Thanks for dinner, I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar. Too steady. I shut the car door without waiting for her reply. Inside, the house smelled like quiet. I turned on the kitchen light. It buzzed for a second before humming steady. I took off my earrings, set them gently on the counter. Rolled the sleeves of my blouse down, hung the coat. My shoes clicked across the linoleum. Each step too loud in the empty space. I poured water into the kettle, let it heat. Didn't drink. The tea bag sat in the cup until it went cold. I walked into the living room, sat in Tom's old chair. The cushion still dipped under my weight, familiar, faithful. I looked around. Nothing had changed, but everything had. Julie's laugh at that table, her careful wording, the glances exchanged when she mentioned my old-fashioned wisdom. Every word had been chosen. Not to honor, to frame. I wasn't Lorraine, the woman who raised her. I was mother, quotation marks included, a narrative tool, a nostalgic anecdote wrapped in a cardigan. I rested my hand on the armrest, felt the threadbare fabric under my palm. She hadn't meant to hurt me, but intent doesn't soften impact. I stared at the blank television screen. In its blackness, I saw the dining table, the wine, the marble, the faces pretending not to see me cringe. I hadn't been invited to share her life. I'd been brought in to prove a point, to play a role. I leaned back, closed my eyes, didn't cry, didn't shake, just remembered. Not the night, the girl, the one who once whispered, "You're my favorite person." I whispered back, "I used to be." The room didn't answer. But it held me better than her smile ever did. The email came at 9:03 a.m. Subject line graph, action required, property record, update confirmation. I almost deleted it. Thought it was spam. But then I saw the sender, Jess First Heart Community Bank. I clicked. It began with, "Dear Ms. Julie Kim." My heart dropped. "Your recent authorization has been processed. Mortgage classification has been updated per request." My name appeared once, as secondary. No phone call, no prior notice. I closed the laptop slowly. Hands steady, voice quiet. I stood, walked to the hallway cabinet. It hadn't been touched in months. Inside old insurance files, tax returns, a torn envelope marked 1214, roof repair. I reached for the folder labeled Deed Original. It was thinner than I remembered. The document was there, but something about it felt off. The signature at the bottom wasn't ink. It was scanned. Faded. I ran my finger along the crease. The paper smelled like dust and time. Behind it, a printed packet I didn't recognize. Transfer Authorization Addendum Joint Title. I flipped through. Pages with my name, typed, not signed, boxes ticked, lines blank. The final page had a note, DocuSign completed by Julie K., timestamp 02:47 p.m. I checked the date. 2 days after that brunch. The one with the jokes and the cold salmon. I sat on the floor. The cabinet door still open behind me. Sunlight angled through the front window. A warm, but it didn't reach my chest. I whispered. She said it was just for convenience. Convenience. That's how it starts. A lost bill, a forgotten password, a well-meaning daughter with a printer and a plan. But I wasn't losing my mind. I was paying attention, just late. I stood, pulled the packet close. Went to the kitchen, set it on the table, made tea I wouldn't drink. The kettle screamed, but I didn't rush. I watched the steam rise. It curled, then vanished, like promises do. When the water settled, I opened the drawer where I kept stamps. Found a yellowed business card, black ink, slightly smudged. S. Warren Brightman, S. Dars, Property and Elder Law. Tom and I had used him when we updated the will. I hadn't called him in years, but the card was still there, waiting. Like me, Warren's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same ticking wall clock, same chipped desk, same smell, paper, lemon cleaner, and old wool suits. He stood when I entered, taller than I remembered. Thinner too. Lorraine, he said, smiling gently. What brings you back to my cave? I sat down, unfolded the packet, laid it in front of him. His fingers moved carefully. Years of reading between lines. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then, softly, she filed this under implied consent. I frowned, meaning. He folded his hands. If the other party doesn't dispute it in writing within 30 days, it stands. But I didn't see it. He nodded. She listed your email address. If the notice was received, legally it's valid. Silence. The clock ticked louder somehow. He added, these things, they're framed as efficiency. But they cut close, Lorraine. Especially when family's involved. I swallowed. She said it was just for emergencies. He tapped a page. This clause lets her authorize transfers, even sale discussions, if in your interest. I stared at the paper. Lines blurred slightly. Not from age. From rage holding its breath. What can I do? His voice gentled. Check the accounts. Watch patterns. Build a record. Quietly, he scribbled on a yellow pad, slid it over. Call me if anything new turns up. I left his office in silence. The door clicked behind me, like a sentence ending mid-word. That night, I made tea I didn't want, opened the laptop. The cursor blinked like a warning. I logged in, waited for the page to load. Bank summary, nothing alarming. Then I clicked, history, and paused. A string of small transfers, monthly, always the same amount, always authorized by Julie. Gas bill, sure. Grocery delivery, okay. But also, consulting fee Kim Holdings. Admin processing, legacy review. All under 400. Just below dispute threshold. Each listed under shared expense. But I hadn't seen the receipts. I hadn't approved a thing. I leaned back. The kitchen light buzzed faintly above me. Outside, the neighborhood slept, calm, clean. Inside, a storm sat in my stomach. So this was love now. Invisible signatures, unspoken takeovers, and a daughter who still called me, Mum, when she needed the optics. I closed the laptop, pressed both palms flat on the table. Not shaking, not yet. Just awake. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. I lay still, eyes open, watching shadows shift across the ceiling. The hum of the refrigerator. A creak from the hallway floor. The wind whispering against the window pane. It was quiet, but not kind. That kind of silence makes you listen too closely. To your breath. To your regrets. Every thought looped. Julie's voice. Warren's words. Those numbers on the screen. The emails I never saw. The trust I gave away too easily. And underneath all of it, Tom's voice. Not loud, not mystical, not imagined, just memory, returning like breath. Uninvited, but needed. We were in the old garage 20 years ago. He was fixing the mower. I'd brought him lemonade. His shirt was soaked through. There was dirt under his nails. He looked up and said, "If they ever take your name from your own hands, take it back." I didn't ask what he meant then. He had grease on his cheek and a twinkle in his eye. It sounded like nothing. But I heard it now, clearer than the wind, sharper than any lawyer's sentence. Tom believed in decency, in boundaries, in earning your place at someone's table, and never forgetting who set the first plate for you. I turned to my side. The pillow smelled faintly of lavender, old fabric softener from last week's wash. A little bit of me still trying to make things soft. My hands were cold. I tucked them under the blanket, but they didn't warm. My chest was still. No rise of anger, just a knowing, like an old truth that had been waiting to be noticed. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Just awake, really, finally awake. At 5:17 a.m., I got out of bed, didn't bother with slippers. The floor was cool, sharp, it kept me steady, kept me here. I filled the kettle, let it hiss, then boil, no toast, no eggs. Just tea, and silence. I sat at the table, the same one Tom sanded by hand, the one Julie spilled juice on in second grade, the one I polished every Sunday, even when no one came to visit. I ran my fingers across the knot in the wood, the one Julie used to trace with her pinky. She used to ask, "Why does it feel like a heartbeat?" I whispered to no one. She erased me with forms. And the house, bless it, stayed quiet, not because it agreed, but because it respected the moment. At 6:03, the sun spilled in, not warm, not golden, but real. It hit the countertop like a reminder. This is still yours. I reached for the phone, not to call Julie, not to beg, not to fight. I scrolled to M, tapped once. Margaret answered on the second ring, her voice still husky with sleep. "Lorraine." "I know it's early," I said. "But you said if I ever needed anything." A pause. Then, "I'll put coffee on." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Be there in 20. I stood. Poured the tea out. Put on the navy cardigan. The one Julie hadn't complimented in years. It still held its shape better than some people I knew. And walked toward the door. One slow step after another. Not dramatic, not sad. Just still mine. Margaret's porch light was still on when I arrived. The screen door creaked like always. Familiar, human. She opened it in her robe, blue with faded roses, her hair pinned up without fuss. "Come in, dear," she said. I just started the pot. The house smelled like morning. Fresh brew, lemon dish soap, and something slow. Time, maybe. She didn't ask why I'd called. Didn't tilt her head the way people do when they expect you to cry. We sat at the table, same table I'd wiped down 3 weeks ago, after Henry spilled jam. The coffee was strong, too strong really, but I drank it anyway. Outside, the lawn was wet with dew. The garden sat still, as if it too was listening. Margaret clicked on the radio, AM news, crackly and warm. A voice reporting grain prices like scripture. I held the mug with both hands. Felt the heat spread into my knuckles. They ached, but the pain was steady. Useful. Margaret looked over. No sugar this time. I shook my head. Need it bitter today. She nodded. Poured herself a cup. No questions. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. The house breathed in the quiet. Henry thumped the wall once from his room. She called back. Be right in, love. Then looked at me. You need anything? I set the cup down. A pen, I said. And a page. She stood, opened a drawer, came back with both. Plain blue pen, lined paper with a grocery list on the back. That do, I nodded. Perfect. She didn't ask what for. Just refilled my coffee and went to check on Henry. I sat with the pen in my hand for a full minute before writing anything. It felt heavy, like it knew what it was about to do. The first line came slow. Then another, and another, not fast, not urgent, just steady, the way truth comes when you're no longer trying to justify anything. I didn't write with anger, not even sadness, just clarity. Each sentence gave something back, an inch of space, a sliver of air. The kitchen clock ticked. The radiator hissed once. Birds began arguing outside the window. When Margaret returned, she didn't look at the page. She looked at me. Her eyes softened. You okay? I folded the paper once. Twice. I will be, I said, and for the first time in months. I meant it. The next morning, I called Warren. He picked up on the third ring. Lorraine, he said, I had a feeling I'd hear from you. I'd like to meet, I said. No coffee, no catch up, just work. He paused, then, come in tomorrow. Bring everything. I did. Bank statements, signed forms. Even the envelope Julie mailed me once. The one with the updated passwords and a sticky note smiley face. Warren read quietly. His desk still smelled like old wood and ink. The same cup of pens. The same brass lamp he'd had when Tom and I first sat across from him. This will take a little time, he said. But nothing we can't undo. If we're careful. I nodded. Careful suits me just fine. I left with a folder marked Restoration Plan. No drama, no confrontation, just steps. That afternoon, I logged into my bank. I opened a new account. My name only. I moved what I could. Small amounts, unnoticed. I removed Julie's access with one click. A short message appeared. Shared privileges revoked. I stared at those words, let them sit, then closed the laptop. The next day, I called the county office. Requested a property title review. They asked if I was in distress. No, I said, I'm just awake. I changed my online passwords, took my time, used names only I would remember. My mother's pie recipe, the street Tom proposed on, the hospital room Julie was born in. Memories that meant nothing to a spreadsheet. That night, I shredded a pile of old mail. Papers with Julie's handwriting, sticky notes that said, "Let me handle this." Statements addressed to J, Kim and Co. The shredder hummed. Consistent. Final. I poured myself a glass of water, stood by the sink. Looked out at the backyard. The roses were blooming again. Margaret had watered them while I met Warren. She left a note on the counter. Still yours. 3 words. More honest than anything I'd heard in months. I turned toward the kitchen mirror. At the small one above the stove hood. Caught my reflection. I expected tired. Was ready for Warren. But I looked steady. There was a crease between my eyebrows I didn't remember. But I liked it. It made me look serious, like someone who'd stopped asking permission. I didn't smile. But I didn't flinch either. Just stared, and nodded once. Quiet, grounded. If you had the chance to take your name back, would you? Tuesday morning, I called the insurance office. A woman named Carla picked up. Hi, I said. I need to change my contact details. She asked for my account number. I gave it. She confirmed my birth date addressed. Then asked, is Julie Kim still your emergency contact? I waited. Let the question hang. No, I said. Remove her. Replace with Margaret Bell. There was a pause. A quick typing sound. Don't, she said. I exhaled. Didn't realize I'd been holding it in. Next beneficiary updates. I faxed a form Warren helped me revise. Crossed out Julie's name. Wrote in someone else's. Someone I hadn't even told yet. It felt strange, but not wrong. The next day, I visited First Heart Bank again. A different branch. Quieter. No marble floors. No performance lighting. Just plastic chairs and fluorescent hum. A young man greeted me. Couldn't have been older than 25. Lorraine Walker. He smiled, professional but kind. Here to review deed documentation. I nodded. Handed him my ID. He led me to a small office with no windows. There was a faint scent of printer ink, and something minty. His chewing gum, maybe. He tapped his keyboard, clicked twice, then said, "We can reissue an ownership certificate reflecting current standing under your name only." I stared at the screen. The line that read "X primary owner, Lorraine Walker, my name, alone, sturdy. Please print it." I said he did. On thick paper, stamped with a raised seal that left a dent beneath my thumb. He handed it to me gently, like it mattered. I folded it once, slid it into my bag. "Anything else I can help you with?" he asked. I shook my head. "That's all." He stood as I left. Didn't rush me. I walked out into midday sunlight. It hit my skin warm. No spotlight, just real warmth. When I got home, I unlocked the hallway cabinet. Set the envelope inside. Next to the will. Next to the copies I'd made, I closed the drawer, paused, then turned the small key and clicked the lock. A quiet sound. But it filled the house. I stood there, hand on the wood. Felt the grain, the slight chip in the corner. Tom's doing. He never did fix it. I smiled. Not wide, not sweet, just satisfied. I didn't feel brave. Didn't feel powerful. But I didn't feel scared anymore. That was enough. Julie called Thursday afternoon. Her tone was light. Measured. Too practiced. "Can you come by tomorrow? Just us? I want to talk." I paused. Then said, "Sir." She gave a time. 3:00 p.m. I hung up. Didn't ask what it was about. I already knew. Friday, I wore gray slacks and my cleanest blouse. Hair pulled back. No jewelry. Just the documents. Tucked inside a manila folder, neat and final. The drive to her house felt shorter than usual. But my hands stayed steady on the wheel. No rush. No dread. I parked in front of her stone and glass 2-story, same trimmed hedges, same porch rug that said live intentionally. She opened the door quickly, smiled. "Hi, Mom." No hug, just a smile. "Come in." The house smelled like vanilla candles and something overly lemony. Counter cleaner, maybe. She led me to the kitchen, pulled out a chair. I sat. She poured tea, set down 2 mugs, one with a chipped lip, mine. I wrapped my fingers around it anyway, the ceramic warm, unfamiliar. She sat across from me, her hands folded. No ring. Nails painted soft coral. "So," she began, "I know things have been tense." I said nothing. Let her keep the air full. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately, how distant things have felt." Still, I stayed quiet. She continued. "I never meant to hurt you. You know that, right?" Her voice dipped, like she was reaching for sincerity instead of actually feeling it. I looked around the kitchen. Too clean, too polished. No magnets on the fridge, no art from Lily. No life, really. Just symmetry. She sipped her tea. I didn't touch mine. "I think we got off track," she said. Her hands fluttered, then stilled again. I nodded once. Still didn't speak. She took a breath. Longer now. Searching. "You've always been there for me, even when I didn't appreciate it." She smiled. "I want us to move forward." Forward. Such a pretty word. When it really means, don't bring up what hurt. I opened the folder, but didn't take anything out yet. Just let it sit on the table. Her eyes dropped to it, and for the first time, she blinked, not from dust, not from surprise, from caution. I leaned back, finally spoke. "I'm glad we're talking." My voice calm, even, because I wasn't here to argue. I was here to show. I opened the folder, took out the first page, laid it on the table. Julie looked at it, then at me. "What's this?" Her voice still soft, curious, not alarmed yet. I said nothing. Just slid the second page forward, a printed transaction log, 3 highlighted lines. She leaned in, eyes scanning quickly. Her fingers curled slightly. She set her cup down. The third sheet, a notarized copy of the title adjustment. My name reinstated as sole owner. She froze there. Didn't blink this time. "Where did you get this?" Her tone sharpened. The room got quieter. Even the fridge seemed to hum softer. I unfolded the last page. Thicker paper, signed at the bottom in blue ink. Julie's eyes moved fast. She knew what it was before I said it. "The new will," I said quietly. "My terms." No confusion going forward. Her mouth parted, closed, then opened again. You changed everything." I looked at her, held her gaze steady. "I restored what was mine, and gave what was mine to those who never asked for it." She sat back in her chair. Shoulders tighter now. One leg crossed too quickly. "This feels dramatic." I shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just overdue." She reached for the title page again. Flipped it like she could reverse it. "Why would you do this, Mom? After everything I've done for you." I let that sit. The list in her mind would be long. Doctor's appointments, autopay setups, those brunches where I smiled through gritted teeth. But none of it was love. It was logistics. Transaction dressed as care. I said, "I'm not here to hurt you." She looked up. "I'm here to correct the record." Julie didn't speak. Her eyes fell back to the papers. Her nails tapped the table, out of rhythm, out of control. And I felt calm. Julie stared at the table, at the will, the title, the record she couldn't edit. Her voice broke the silence. "So that's it? Are you cutting me off?" Her tone wasn't angry. It was confused. Like a child locked out of her own room. I looked at her for a long time. Long enough to see the girl beneath the woman who had learned how to dress like power. "No," I said. "I'm cutting myself free." She blinked, sat back. Her hand touched the title page again, but she didn't move it. "You didn't even tell me." I stood. "Julie, for years, you've told me who I was. I buy what you left out." I gathered the papers, slow and neat. No rush. "I asked for nothing. You gave logistics. I gave legacy." She didn't speak. The air in the kitchen had changed. Vanilla candles still burned, but the warmth was gone. As I slid the folder back into my bag, she whispered, "Does Lily still get anything?" I paused at that. Not for her. For Lily. She'll get what she remembers. I didn't mean money. I hope she understood that. I buttoned my coat. 1, 3. Then stepped toward the door. Julie stood too. Not to stop me, just because she didn't know what else to do. You're making a mistake, she said. I turned the knob. So did you. The sun outside was gentler than last time. Cool, early spring light. It felt like breathing room. I walked to my car. Didn't look back, not once. Inside the driver's seat, I sat a moment, listened to nothing, no shouting, no apologies, no scene, just silence. But this time, it belonged to me. I reached into my coat pocket, touched the corner of the will. Still crisp, still mine. If you had to choose between peace and legacy, what would you protect? The house was quiet when I came home, not the uneasy kind. The kind that waits for something to explode. No, this was the quiet of clean floors, of dishes put away, of breath released. Julie didn't call, didn't text. I didn't expect her to. I set my bag on the counter, took off my shoes, hung my coat by the door, then stood there a while, let the stillness settle into my shoulders. The kitchen clock ticked. A small, content sound. I made tea, Earl Grey this time, 1 bag, no sugar, as it steeped. I opened the drawer beneath the phone. Inside were old birthday cards, Julie's handwriting in loopy blue pen. Best mom ever. One with stickers, one signed LJ in crayon. I looked at them for a while, then slid them into a manila envelope, not to throw away. Just put aside. Next came the framed photo on the hallway shelf. Her wedding. Me in pale lavender, Tom in navy, Julie in lace, eyes wide and proud. I dusted it, wrapped it in a soft dish towel, placed it in a box marked 2000s, closed the lid, stacked it gently, not erasing, just archiving. I moved room to room, one drawer at a time, the house breathing with me. In the living room, I pulled down the list taped by the phone. Emergency contacts. Julie's number at the top. I peeled the tape, folded the list, tucked it in the same envelope with the cards, then sat, not tired, just done for now. The tea had cooled, but it tasted right. No sugar, no need. Outside, the late afternoon light bent through the window, fell across the tile floor in soft bands. Dust floated in it, silent, gentle. The kind of light that forgives you for missing things too long and lets you move on anyway. I stepped out to the garden after tea. The late sun sat low, everything golden, but not showy. Near the gate, a brown paper bag leaned against the fence. Inside, 2 zucchinis, a bundle of carrots, and a small folded note. Tuesday soup. Margaret, no signature needed. I smiled, went back inside for a basket, the woven one with the squeaky handle. Returned to the mint bed first, snipped a few sprigs. The smell jumped up, sharp, clean. Then to the rosemary. It had overgrown. I trimmed it slowly, let the clippings fall into the basket. Tom used to love that smell, said it reminded him of Sunday chicken and his grandmother's windowsill. I pressed one twig between my fingers. The oil stayed on my skin, earthy, honest. I worked down the row, pulling dead stems, brushing soil from my knees. The dirt was soft today, spring ready. A robin pecked near the tomato cage. Unbothered, when the basket was half full, I stood, my knees popped. But not painfully, not like before. I looked around. Nothing had changed, but something had. I walked over to the wooden bench under the elm tree. The one Tom built. The one I hadn't sat in for years. It used to feel too empty. I brushed off a few leaves, lowered myself down. The wood creaked, familiar. Not accusing, I sat there, fingers still smelling of mint and rosemary. Breath easy, not full of memory, just presence. And for once that was enough. Back inside, I passed the hallway shelf and reached for the old radio. Tom's. Still worked. Sometimes. I turned the knob gently. A small crackle, then music, soft swing, clarinet rising, bass steady. Something from the 60s. He used to hum along. I left it playing, let it fill the kitchen. No vocals, just rhythm, warm and low. I moved slowly, past the sink, past the stove, barefoot on wood floor, each step light. Not dancing, not quite, but close enough to remember how I used to. The window over the sink glowed orange. Sun setting behind the willow. I paused there, looked at the yard I just left, the rosemary row, the empty bench, then turned back, one hand on the counter. My reflection in the oven glass caught me. Not young, not sad, just present. I smiled. A small one, no one to see, and that felt just fine. I thought peace would be quiet. Turns out peace hums. The letter came on a Wednesday. Pink envelope. Stick on heart sealing the flap. No return address. But I knew that handwriting. Crooked, uneven loops. Letters leaning like trees in wind. I brought it inside. Set it on the kitchen counter. Made tea first. Then sat down to open it. Carefully, like it might tear if I rushed. Inside a single sheet of lined paper. Purple pen. 3 spelling errors. But no mistakes. Dear Grandma, I miss your soup. I miss your smell. Mommy says we're busy, but I want to come. Do you still have the swing in the tree? Can I help water the garden? Love, Lily. My hands didn't shake. They just held. I read it 3 times. Then once aloud, just to hear her. The smell of the ink, sweet, waxy, reminded me of sticker books and Saturday mornings. I opened the drawer by the stove. Took out my floral stationery. The kind Tom gave me on our 25th, I chose a pale blue sheet. Wrote slowly. Dear Lily, yes, the swing is still there, and so is the rosemary. It misses you too. The garden got messy when you stopped visiting. But I started cleaning it up. I planted new mint. And Margaret brought carrots for soup. You can help stir. You can even choose the bowls. There's a spot on the bench for you, under the elm. It's not very big, but it's warm. Come when you can. I'll be here. I folded the page, slipped it into an envelope, sealed it gently. I didn't mention her mother. Didn't ask about schedules or permission. Just signed it, Love, Grandma, then walked it to the mailbox. Raised the red flag. Let the wind carry the rest. The next morning, I was steeping chamomile when I heard tires on gravel. Not a car. Lighter. Rhythmic. I peeked out the window. At the gate, a small pink jacket, purple backpack, 2 hands gripping the straps, Lily. She didn't knock, didn't wave, just stood, waiting. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. Walked to the door. Opened it. The morning air was soft. Sun just warming the porch. I stepped down slowly. The wood creaked under my heel. She didn't move. Just stared, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed. I opened the gate, no words. Just a gesture, arms wide. She dropped the bag, ran. Her shoes hit the stone path with uneven thumps. A stitch of pink and breath and hope. She landed against me hard. Arms tight. I held her, felt the small tremble in her shoulders. Felt mine match it. She smelled like wind and strawberry shampoo. Like home, when it comes back quietly. We went inside. Lily kicked off her shoes. Placed them by the mat. Same as always. I opened the lid of the soup pot. Steam rose. Carrots, rosemary, slow warmth. She didn't ask. Just walked to the lower cabinet. Pulled out 2 bowls. The blue ones with tiny white dots. She still remembered. I set the table. She grabbed 2 spoons. No chatter. No questions. Just hunger and knowing. Sunlight fell through the window, spilling across the floor. Lit the wooden table like a quiet blessing. We ate slowly. The sound of spoons, the occasional breath. That was enough. I didn't think of Julie, not even once. I looked at Lily, her cheeks full, her eyes calm, and thought, this is what legacy feels like. The sun had barely warmed the porch when I stepped outside with a basket of linens. Fresh washed. Lavender scented. I clipped the corners to the clothesline, let them wave like soft white flags. The phone rang inside. 3 steady chimes. I wiped my hands and hurried back in. Hello, Lorraine, it's Margaret. Her voice was like always, low, no fuss. The church is hosting a widow's lunch today. Chicken pot pie. Peach cobbler. Nothing fancy. I smiled into the receiver. Why me? Because you're a widow, she said plain. I chuckled. But I don't wear the badge. You don't have to. Margaret said. But you could sit with folks who get it. There was silence between us. Not awkward, just waiting. I'll come, I said. Good, wear that lavender blouse. The one Tom liked. She remembered. I hung up. Upstairs I changed slow. Pressed the blouse at the collar. Pinned a small brooch near the buttons. One earring had lost its twin. I wore it anyway. At the mirror, I didn't look young, but I looked ready. Outside, the air had softened. The road's clear. My old Bic steady as ever. I parked beside the church hall. Yellow bricks, cracked steps, smelled faintly of lemon oil and thyme. Inside, the noise was gentle. Forks against ceramic, laughter low and real. I paused near the doorway, saw a long table, 7 women, maybe 8. All with soft eyes, none in a rush, one empty seat, waiting. Margaret waved me over. Her napkin was folded neat in her lap. You're just in time. They brought out pie. I sat down. The chair creaked, but held. No one asked where I'd been, or who I'd lost, or why I was alone. It was merciful. A woman beside me wore a sunflower brooch. She leaned over. I'm Nora, she said. I eat dessert first. Her plate proved it. Half a cobbler, warm and melting. I smiled, took a small slice of pie. The crust flaked perfectly. Next came conversation, not small talk, but soft talk. Church shoes, peach trees. A man one of them used to love who wrote bad poems and good apology letters. I married him anyway. She shrugged. Someone else chimed in. Mine thought microwaves ruined flavor. He reheated everything in a saucepan, even coffee. Laughter. Not loud, but full. Margaret nudged me. You okay? I think so, I said. I hadn't eaten this slow in years. Not since Sundays with Tom. The woman at the far end of the table, hair like silver thread, set down her fork. I stopped talking to my son in '04, she said. Calm, even cheerful. He said I was too old to matter. Guess who needed rent last year? The table burst open, spoons tapping, eyes rolling, hands covering mouths in mock shock. Even I laughed. From the chest, out loud, a full one. Nora clapped once. Now that's a laugh, dear. Keep it. I wiped the corner of my eye. But it wasn't a tear. Not really. It was release. We finished our pie, talked about soup, and lavender lotion, and why spring felt different after 70. I left with no phone numbers, no promises, just a warm belly and a voice that had laughed for real. There was no letter from Julie, no knock at the door, no teary reunion on the porch. And that was okay. Life didn't wrap itself in bows. Not for women like me, but it did settle into small rituals. Cutting mint at dawn, folding Lily's pajamas, hearing Margaret's voice through the fence. I never made a speech, never declared myself healed. But one morning, as I brewed tea, I realized the silence no longer stung. It just existed, like wallpaper, and my breath, it came easy. Some days, I missed being needed. Other days, I thanked the sky for not being interrupted. The garden grew. Lily laughed more. I stopped talking to old photos. But I didn't take them down. They belonged. Even if they didn't speak back. One afternoon, I found an old journal, blank, except for Tom's handwriting on the first page. To Lorraine, the one who never gives up. I opened to the next page, wrote the date, and began. I am still here. I am not what they left behind. I am what kept going. I wrote slow, each word with care. Not for anyone else, just me. There would be more pages, more quiet dinners, more soup, and maybe a spring trip with Margaret if our knees behaved. But for now, the pen in my hand, the sun through the window, the rosemary in bloom. That was enough. I stopped waiting for an apology. I started writing my own ending.